Okay, hi there. This is lecture number 4. All revolutions display a pattern. Economic stuff from the 1800s. Let's get started. All right, there were many new economic theories during the 1800s. These resulted in economic revolutions across Europe. We're going to discuss these economic revolutions using, of course, GENOS. Europe was a very revolutionary place during the 1800s, which is to say it was full of major changes. The political changes are often what we talk about most during this period, like the end of the French Revolution, Napoleon, the reestablishment of monarchies across Europe because of the Congress of Vienna. And we see the action of people demanding increased political representation. We see John Locke's theories about replacing governments in action. This was so clear during the French Revolution and continued with Napoleon. But we are also going to see the political reaction by the conservative regimes and monarchs who wanted to maintain control or power over their people. So there were clear political clashes across Europe. By the mid-1800s, we're going to see revolutionary clashes between the rich and poor, between those that have wealth and political power and those with little wealth and less political say. We're going to talk about these economic clashes today. We've already learned about social theories like liberalism and conservatism, nationalism, from our last lectures. Well, these social theories also were influenced by new economic ideas from the 1800s, and it is essential, or really important at least, that we understand why people cared about or created new economic theories. So we're going to talk about all these economic issues from the 1800s using GENOS, of course. All right, G in GENOS, government problems. Many economic problems from the 1800s were influenced by government issues of the time. Following the revolutions of 1830 and 1848, which did little to really change governments, we are going to continue to see unrest amongst the common people. That's to say, unhappiness amongst the Joe Schmoes of society and their dissatisfaction with governments that favored big businesses that had emerged during the Industrial Revolution. See, governments were interested in increasing trade and profits during the 1800s as they sought new marketplaces for the goods they began producing in the factories that were popping up all over the place during the Industrial Revolution. These marketplaces included, the colonies European nations had established in places like South Asia and Africa that you learned about in 9th grade, remember? Well, during the 1800s, governments were unlikely to respond favorably to revolutionary ideas that might affect a big business's profits and therefore a nation's wealth. So the government problems from the perspective of the common citizen in Europe, at least, would have been that governments were more concerned with money-making than workers' rights. One can argue that that's still the case today. That's a topic for discussion later. This is going to lead to new ideas about how governments should meet the needs of the population and included ideas like socialism. All right, E in GENOS, economic problems. New factories will emerge during the 1800s, during the period of time that became known as the Industrial Revolution. The emergence of factories and the shift of workers from rural farms to industrialized city centers will result in a new way of life for the general population. Factory owners will gain immense wealth from their business endeavors. Many workers will gain a better quality of life with newfound jobs. However, as the Industrial Revolution progressed, factory owners, their profits grew and grew, while workers' wages were often stagnant. That's to say, they weren't rising as quickly. Urbanization also led to major differences between the rich and poor in cities. The poor often lived in deplorable conditions compared to their middle and upper class counterparts. All right, N, new ideas. Okay, so in terms of the GENOS lens we've been using to describe revolutions in history, new ideas during the 1800s are going to have a huge impact economically speaking. Perhaps the two most famous economic theories that emerged during the 1800s include capitalism and socialism. So now I'm going to describe these theories to give you their origins and hopefully help you to understand why they were so influential during the 1800s and which types of people supported these theories. The first of these theories is capitalism. Capitalism is a theory that emerged originally during the Enlightenment. It is based largely on the ideas of a man named Adam Smith from Scotland. So let's talk about this guy. Adam Smith believed that governments should stay out of business. They should be able to grow as much as they want in whatever manner their owners want. People create businesses, Smith argued, with their own hard-earned cash. This hard-earned cash is called capital. Ever heard of the phrase, you need money to make money? You know, people invest their money in businesses with the hope of that business growing and therefore making more money to invest. It's a big cycle of investing money, investing money, making money. It's the whole growing your business theory. Governments, Adam Smith argued, mess up the whole cycle by preventing growth using laws and taxes. Smith wrote a book called The Wealth of Nations. This book is all about those theories about keeping government out of businesses. Adam Smith's ideas became known as laissez-faire. Laissez-faire is a French term that literally translates as, quote, you allow / make them / do what they want. I know that sounds weird, but if you take French, you'll understand. We use this term to describe capitalism. You're letting people do what they want. Laissez-faire policies called for little or no government intervention in businesses. Basically, Smith said, stay out of business, governments. Let us do what we need to do to create economic growth, and we'll show you the money. Smith argued that government intervention wasn't necessary because a free market would result in mass competition, innovation, that's to say new products, and something he called the invisible hand. Basically, Smith said that the market would regulate itself. The most obvious supporters of capitalism or laissez-faire policies included business and factory owners during the 1800s. You know, they wanted to make as much of a profit as possible, and that's why people start businesses, okay? The opposite, of course, of capitalism is economic socialism. Socialism is a theory that calls for people to share their resources for the benefit of society. It emerged in response to capitalism. People, especially workers in factories, didn't end up with the huge profits from big businesses. Many people believed that businesses should belong to all people and not just select business owners. Socialists wanted to share in the profits and felt all people should share resources so everyone could enjoy a better life. We will talk about socialism much more in our next unit on the Industrial Revolution. Today, I'm going to focus on the most extreme type of socialism that emerged during the 1800s. It's called Marxist socialism, aka communism. A German philosopher named Karl Marx came up with a new theory called scientific socialism. He wrote down his ideas in a famous book called The Communist Manifesto in 1848. I should add that this is a significant year in terms of revolutions. I mean, remember the revolutions of 1830 and 1848? It's not just a coincidence. Karl Marx was trying to cause a lot of change, a revolution. He wanted to mobilize the already politically unhappy masses of Europe and inspire them to revolt against what he considered to be bad economic practices. In his book, The Communist Manifesto, Marx argued that throughout all of history, there are rich people and then there are poor people. These two groups have always been at odds with one another. Rich people want to get richer and keep as much of their money as possible. Poor people, Marx argued, are always at rich people's mercy. Rich people get richer, Marx argued, because they are exploiting or taking advantage of poor people. And I hope you were all able to make the recent performance of Urinetown. Bravo, Brighton performers, by the way. But, you know, this musical clearly shows the class divide that Marx was talking about. But I digress. Anyway, Marx argued that the only way society will ever get better was that if poor people could organize themselves somehow and overthrow the capitalists and then start their own society in which people learn to share the wealth. In order to share the wealth, you've got to get rid of rich people and their greed, Marx argued, and he believed society needed to get rid of social classes as well. Marx felt that the government should be heavily involved in all businesses in order to make sure that workers and normal people were protected from the greedy interests of industrial capitalists, all those business owners. Obviously, the two theories I've just described, capitalism as well as communism, are almost completely opposite from one another. So that should hopefully show you new economic theories influenced by economic revolutions in the 1800s. This theoretical opposition will replay itself throughout the 1800s, into the 1900s, and continues even today. Ever hear about the Occupy Wall Street movement? Yeah, well, there you go. All right, now we're on to the O of GENOS, other revolutions or ongoing revolutions. During the 1800s, we are going to see a very different way of life. First of all, there was more food in Europe. More food equals more people. Why? Well, if people have enough to eat and aren't constantly searching for their next meal, they have time to focus on other things like art, literature, social problems, and politics. And more kids will reach adulthood if they are eating better. This increase in food production in the 1700s through the early 1800s became known as the Agricultural Revolution, which really means a farming revolution. This is often called the Agrarian Revolution. Agrarian is a word that simply means farming or agricultural. New machines and techniques allowed farmers to get the most from their land, called increased crop yield. This increase in food production is going to lead to better diets across Europe and population growth. New farming inventions that inspired the Agrarian Revolution included Jethro Tull's seed drill, which helped to more efficiently plant crops in rows. Farmers also began using closed-off portions of land and fenced land areas called enclosures as part of their crop rotation. Europe's population grew by 120 million people from 17 to 1800. The Agrarian Revolution will then lead to the Industrial Revolution, which we will focus on in more detail next unit. The Industrial Revolution included the inventions of complex steam-powered machines in huge factories. Instead of working as farmers, Europe's huge population from the 1700s and through the 1800s began migrating to cities to find jobs as workers in factories. These workers are going to eventually demand better pay, better working conditions, and fewer hours of labor. What we will begin to see across Europe is the development of mass economic inequality because of early industrialization. These economic problems will lead to new social theories. So basically, the other revolutions that directly resulted in changes in policies in Europe include the Agrarian and Industrial revolutions. Alright, S, social inequality. This is a short one, and it has a lot to do with all the other categories I've already discussed. Quite frankly, social hierarchies exist in all societies. There are usually social classes in all places, right? However, the social inequality during the 1800s was very economic in nature. There were the haves and the have-nots in newly industrialized society, and new economic theories like capitalism and Marxist socialism will result in many clashes between the rich and poor throughout the 1800s. This will include labor associations being formed eventually, called unions, to demand higher wages and better working conditions. Unions would organize strikes in which people refused to work unless their demands were met. During the 1800s, many reform laws were passed, and these reforms are going to address some of this social inequality. In fact, there was a huge rise in the middle class during the 1800s because of these reforms, which gave people higher wages and a better life. The 1800s include efforts by working class men to have more say in government as well. A great example of this was the Chartist movement in Great Britain during the 1830s, in which men demanded that Parliament better represent the needs of all men, not just wealthy ones, by demanding that the right to vote be extended to all men, because before only wealthier men and educated men could vote. This didn't end up happening in Great Britain until 1867 for all men, but it was an important step towards social equality in many people's opinions. Other groups of people demanded representation and increased voting rights as well. The 1800s also saw many women fighting to receive the right to vote. Those are suffrage rights. So ultimately, we need to know that GENOS can really be used to describe the conditions in Europe during the 1800s, and the ensuing revolutions, they will result in massive change.